Happy Saturday, everybody, and welcome in for a live edition of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. A lot of great action on Thursday. We saw Santa Clara, St. Mary's get big wins, LMU, Portland, and it was also, I'm blanking on Oregon State also getting wins. So we'll recap a
Mm.
lot of that. We'll get into Saturday's games as well. But we're going to start with Rocco Miller from bracketeer.org and just hit as we've gone through this season. You've started to make some of the bracket predictions. We're now into bracket season where we can start to talk about what it's going to look like a little bit more. So I guess, well, before I get into that, it's like you're on the road all the time. Where are you coming to us from this morning?
I'm back in WCC country, so it's good to be back, Zach. I'm here in Oakland at the home base. I'll be around for the weekend, and no major games here unless you count Stanford versus Florida State. I'm going to skip that one and just take it all in. A couple big showdowns today. St. Mary's, your boys on the way to the Palouse at Washington State, a tricky trip as we saw a couple weeks ago when San Francisco went up there and all sorts of chaos occurred in the second half in that game, and the Cougars got the best of the Dons. But obviously, Cougars reeling after that Santa Clara game. And then I think the other big one is, and I think the big story we'll get to is Santa Clara's rise these last two performances. I think it'll be a big test in Corvallis, the tight turnaround. Oregon State and Santa Clara. I covered that game in the Levy Center, and it went to OT. It was an awesome battle. Santa Clara survived by 1 point. Today's the rematch. So I would say two very juicy showdowns for us to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you mentioned it. You talked about Santa Clara. So let's kind of dive into what your latest bracket looks like, because I did notice that
Yeah.
there were a couple of things that I saw that some might consider a bit of a big surprise, and there were a total of three teams actually mentioned in the totality of your a layout. So kind of talk about where you have those teams at the moment and just kind of your read on where they stand today.
Sure. Yeah. So high level, after going through the full forecast all day yesterday, and we did our fielding the 68 show, broke down a lot of these teams. We didn't get into the WCC enough. I had a little segment on Santa Clara, but I would say Gonzaga, St. Mary's, the two bellwether teams of the league, are safe for right now. They're both wearing white in the projection on the opening March Madness day, which doesn't say much for Gonzaga. Their aspirations start of the year was a 1 seed in the West. They're now an 8 seed in the West as we look at it as a snapshot in time based on all the results that are in. And the way it broke down, St. Mary's ended up a 7 seed in the West. So they're able to both be in the same region. But I think the bad news is Gonzaga in this example sent to Raleigh, North Carolina to face a tough and also improving Creighton team. The winner of that will get Tennessee. And then in St. Mary's case, they'd be sent to Wichita, which isn't as far, but and a decent first round matchup, I would say, against Oklahoma. But the winner of that would get Kansas in Kansas's backyard of Wichita. So not exactly the greatest WCC forecast ever, and hopefully that can improve as we even on Monday maybe it'll improve. So that's where those two are, and then Santa Clara is extremely interesting as a unicorn at large candidate. I think you and I and several others in the league know how hard they work to build as good of a schedule as possible. They've been doing that for 3-4 years. And it really clicked a little bit this year with the road win at McNeese. That's a compelling case to the committee because A, nobody's willing to go down there, and they were. And B, they got the win. And now, of course, the big news, they win at the Kennel. That, of course, changes everything, and it's on the road. So anytime you win on the road, it changes everything in bracketology for your opportunities to get in or move up the seed list, however you want to look at it, wherever you're sitting. So they've piqued some interest there. Then they go and thump Washington State. So of course, all their performance numbers are getting better and starting to get into that zone where you'd like to see them. But the reality for the Broncos is they'll need to be selected based on their resume and body of work. And quite frankly, their resume and body of work is all over the map. There's really nobody like them. They have 4 subpar losses, of course, headlined by North Dakota State at home in overtime. We've talked about that ad nauseum all year long, and we probably will have to continue bringing it up. And then the unfortunate 2-point home loss to Stanford, that's starting to sting, but Stanford continues to improve. So maybe that won't look as bad later. It still counts as a subpar loss. And then the loss to Washington in the championship game of their tournament, unfortunately, falls in what we call quad 2B. So it's not advantageous. And then the LMU road loss by 3 last week is a quad 3 loss. So 4 of those are below the belt. And above the belt, you've got some nice stuff like Bradley's getting close to the at large picture themselves. They got that great win in Vegas by very convincing by 10. They pounded TCU. It'd be great if TCU could get some wins. That would help the Broncos. And so they're in a position now where you got to keep rooting for your TCUs, your Bradleys, your McNeeses to dominate if possible. And then right in front of them, the schedule brings this big game at another quad 1, Oregon State on the road. You get to go to the Palouse, Washington State later, and at St. Mary's will be their biggest game left to move the needle. And here's the other thing. Here's the big thing. There's a metric called the KPI. It's called the Kevin Pagua Index. It's on the selection committee's team sheets. And it's overlooked often, I would say, because I think the strength of resume and now the wins above bubble are probably a little bit more dependent on. And in a committee setting, you need consensus decision on the vote. So I would say take it with a huge dose of salt here. But the KPI has Santa Clara number 27 in the nation. And I think that is so drastically different than any other metric that it at least needs to be brought up in the committee room. So I'm listing Santa Clara as a considered team as like the next 8 out because I think they're in the conversation. They've got so many different, like I said, they have so many different unique elements with that big time road win. One of the models saying they're a top 27 team and a nice collection of results. It's a really compelling story. And if you're torn on a bunch of very mediocre power conference teams, why not throw the Broncos in there? So there's hope. Absolutely, there's hope.
For Santa Clara, I mean, again, like we're always going to bring up, and you mentioned it, like all those bad losses early in the year, because you can't not talk about Santa Clara resume, what this team has been in totality without bringing those games up. But at the same time, I'm like, you mentioned the opportunities that still present themselves. What do they have to do to maybe erase some of that? They do still get St. Mary's twice? Do they have to split there? Do they need to beat Gonzaga again? Like what if they end up top 2 in the WCC, which I actually think is a real possibility at this stage, which seems wild that either Gonzaga or St. Mary's could end up not in one of those top 2. What does Santa Clara come Selection Sunday need to have done in the next month and a half to actually make themselves a real contender to get in?
Well, I think the first step would be to get enough good to outweigh the bad. So, like I said before, I don't know if the committee does it. It draws the line exactly where I draw, but I know it's close. So again, I'm counting those 4 games I mentioned: the LMU, Stanford, North Dakota State, and Washington losses as below the belt subpar losses. You would want at least 4 wins to balance that. I think if you at least balanced it with the road Gonzaga, that should outweigh the bad. So that'd be step one, and obviously on your journey to getting those 4 wins, and you could argue they have 2 now. They have 2 in quad 1, so we can count those. One of them, of course, only against Gonzaga is against an actual projected tournament team so far. But as you said, Zach, there's 3 more chances to play at least against other tournament teams. That's the other Gonzaga home matchup and the 2 against your Gales. So if they win 1 or 2 more, or you pick off road Washington State, road Oregon State, and they still remain in quad 1, I think there's a path to get on a balancing, outweighing the bad there. And then what you'll start to see happen is, just focus on winning those games, which they have to do anyway. I'm just saying for like fans here, focus on getting your Broncos some wins in those games, and your records in each of the quads are naturally going to improve. Your other metrics that you're struggling with, like the strength of resume, the wins above bubble, those are naturally going to improve. Everything's just going to look better. And there's OD models that are starting to like them now. So I'd be really excited to see, wake up one morning and see those results in. And, I just think they can be more and more compelling because the WCC is such a unique league. There's 6 quality teams. LMU is not a bad 7th team. And then you have nationally at the top, you have these super conferences all over the place. And by the end of the year, there's going to be a lot of teams with 10 to 13 to 14 losses. And right now, Santa Clara has 7 losses. So they might be in that boat too. But if they can get to the end with like 9 losses or maybe just 10 exactly, and they have all these collections of road wins and interesting results, I think they can stay in the discussion long term. And so I think that's what's right in front of them.
Yeah, this is going to be really fascinating to watch. I know a number of Santa Clara folks who have reached out to me who are definitely in like they're ready to see them fall apart and see them kind of come back to
Right.
earth. But we haven't
I,
actually
I
seen
get
it
that
yet in
too. I get
WCC
that too.
play.
Yeah.
It's they backed up a good Gonzaga win with another good Washington State win. Obviously, the test up at Gill Coliseum today is going to be a big one because Oregon State plays very well in that building. So another big test for the Broncos.
Big test.
So, going to jump over to St. Mary's, and this is a team that it really does seem like since that Utah State loss back in December has started to really find themselves. Like they have dominated WCC play to this point, and yes, the first 6 games were against the bottom half of the league, but we saw the other night as they played against USF that this was a dominating performance. This is starting to look like this a St. Mary's defense that we're used to seeing over the course of the last few seasons. As you look at St. Mary's and their potential to rise, and yes, they have Gonzaga next week, so like they have like that first big test on the calendar in just 7 days. How what's their potential to actually kind of how high is their ceiling on this front? Because right now you have them as a 7. They were a 5. They've been a 5 seed each of the last 3 seasons.
Right.
While some of the wins don't look like they're solid wins, but they're not great wins. What's maybe their ceiling of this squad?
Yeah, the ceiling is good because you have 2 Gonzaga opportunities still. So you win those two, and again, Gonzaga, they're not, nobody's safe in the WCC right now. I think that's the most interesting thing. Like, if St. Mary swept them, Gonzaga would be seriously in trouble to make the field at all. But the good news about Gonzaga as an opponent is they're still so high up in the net. They're 19th in the net. Their overall predictive average is 16. And I try to remind fans and overall community coaches too that a team's net and their predictives are less about themselves and so more about the opportunity to play against a team like that. Because if St. Mary's beats a number 19 team, and you beat them convincingly, obviously you're going to shoot up. You're going to get the quality win, and everything else is going to shoot up. And they're in that range of teams. Anytime you're between like a 5 all the way down to a 10 on the seed chart, you're basically getting judged primarily on that performance stuff. So St. Mary's for now, even they have like no quad 1 games at all.
Right.
I know there's a bunch of games that are really close that have fallen in or fallen out, but they're just like, what do you do with them? You can really only seed them based on what they've performed like, and those numbers have been skyrocketing with these dominant performances, including the San Francisco one the other night. And so they're basically 25th across the board. That smells like 7 seed. It doesn't really necessarily mean they're a 7 seed. What it is it's a comparison of all these other teams, and they just happen to fall in as the last number 7 for me. Like, I thought they were a little bit stronger, even though like Clemson's the one right next to them, and Clemson's won at Pitt. They've won 3 quad 1 games. Clemson's got some material to look at, whereas St. Mary's looks kind of blank. But the seeding in this part of the bracket, as the committee says, is based on who would be a more formidable opponent, and you could easily argue St. Mary's would still be more formidable than Clemson. So that's how they got on the 7 line today. I'm sure they'll be compared with plenty of other teams as we go along, but yeah, the ceiling is similar to before. If St. Mary's and Gonzaga end up just turning the lights on and not losing to any of the other teams anymore, and dominate everybody else and split their series, I think we can see a result like we've seen the last couple of years, where they're both inside the top 5 on the seed chart. And maybe because of the depth of the league this year, there's enough juice there to get them into the top 4.
Now, with St. Mary's, I mean, like we've seen them, they're 7-0 right now. This is, I think a lot of people are starting to get reminded that this is the team that's actually won the regular season the last 2 years. And yes, they
Yeah.
shared it with Gonzaga a couple years ago, but just the job that Randy Bennett has done with this squad. You lose an Aiden Mahaney, you lose a Joshua Jefferson, you lose an Alex Dukas, and they're right where they were a year ago. And this also seems like it's a time of year where they just start to play well. They were in this hot stretch a year ago at the same time. I mean, you've seen them a couple times.
Yeah.
Uh, just kind of like your, I guess, the general read on what the St. Mary's team is, what you've seen, and is this is obviously going to be one of the top two teams in the WCC again, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, but there's certainly no guarantees. I mean, based on what they've achieved so far, we've been in this situation before in January with the Gales, so it's really like riding a bike at this point. But they're 41st in strength of resume. So if they take a couple upset losses for any reason, they're certainly not safe. But my impression as a basketball team is similar to before. Randy Bennett's system is tried and true. He needed a couple of months to get these guys comfortable with their roles. He's really rigid about it looking a certain way. We had a good conversation after the LMU win. I was there a couple of Tuesdays ago, or I guess it was the start of this month. Really good conversation with him about that, just getting these guys comfortable. And, I think there's a little bit of a challenge this year with more people in the rotation that are newer to the system in their first year in the system, really. Jordan Ross didn't really play last year. Obviously, Mikey Lewis is new. Hardaway's new as a transfer. Moraskis is a transfer. So it's a bigger quantity of people to go along with your rock steady vets like Barrett, Saxon, Marshallonis. And so you can see when it's dialed in and clicking, their confidence goes up. They're able to extend leads. It's another thing Coach Bennett and I talked about was just the ability to extend the lead, turning great defense into great offense. And we see the best teams nationwide play a similar style, but I think the thing that has always separated St. Mary's is you give them a few days of preparation. We've talked about it on this show, and they know everything about the opponent, how to shut them down, take them out of what they want to do, make them go to their third, their fourth options, and make those teams extremely uncomfortable. And that's how some of these games get ugly real quick. And it seems like every time they play San Francisco, that's what happens. It happened again on Thursday. It's literally like watching the same movie over and over again. But to St. Mary's' credit, a model of being this consistent in college basketball, especially in 2025, is so much harder than it looks. Stuff that worked 10 years ago for a lot of coaches doesn't work anymore. Randy Bennett's made it work. It's an unbelievable real story. He should be in every Hall of Fame that has ever existed, honestly.
The St. Mary's team it does seem like they're starting to click. You mentioned just like they needed some time to figure it out. That's exactly what it looks like. And now it's starting to all kind of fall into place really at the right time. With, again, they started this tough 8-game stretch where they play the top half of the league just the other day. They're going to be at Washington State later this afternoon. So another big test for them against David Riley's squad. And that is they're gonna. I think they'll finally be the first team that's going to score more than 60 against St. Mary's in
Yeah,
WCC play.
right. No, it'll be an interesting game today because Washington State really needs to respond after that. They had a clunker at Santa Clara, got beat by a red hot team. So interesting to see if it's more like Washington State is really hitting a wall, or were they going to rise to the occasion today? See how good of a crowd they can get. They sometimes get, now the students are back, they sometimes get some pretty rowdy crowds there. As a Washington guy, I know that all too well. But St. Mary's big picture, they've never had a WCC 7-game stretch like they're about to have, or I guess it's 8 if you count the San Francisco game on Thursday. So they go to Santa Clara next Wednesday, host Gonzaga a week from today, and then they go to San Francisco and Oregon State in the same back-to-back. That's a super challenging week. And then the host Santa Clara and Washington State after that. So there's nothing but quality games in front of them. So that's why I wasn't as concerned about St. Mary's not having a quad 1 game, because I think by the time we wake up on February 16th, after that stretch is over, there'll be a lot of results to look at. And I'm sure St. Mary's will be fine. I think just knowing the amount of prep time they need, maybe the most dangerous game is at Oregon State on the 8th, as funny as that sounds, because it'll be a really tight turnaround after playing a tough San Francisco round 2 game on the 6th.
That's one at least I'm hoping that goes well, because that's one I'm planning to travel up to Corvallis to see in
Oh,
person.
nice. Good
So
trip.
we will so we will see what that looks like for St. Mary's as they end up going through this entire tough stretch. So Gonzaga, and this is a team that obviously everyone is looking at, and there's a lot of concern right now, and because they lost back-to-back games, losing to Santa Clara, losing to Oregon State last week, and obviously everyone points to the defense, and it obviously is a huge concern. They've given up 200 points in the last two games,
Yeah.
and but for their resume, it's like they're starting to slide. The expectations. I've talked with a number of people that it has to shift because this isn't the team that we thought we were going to see in the beginning of the year. This a title contender, like they do not look like anymore. They look more like a middle of the pack team in the tournament as you're starting to see what they're doing, obviously, like I'm sure that even from a couple weeks ago, when you were starting to think about uh, bracketing everybody out, they were much higher than where they are today. What looking at this team, what's the maybe the most troubling troubling sign for them as they go through the rest of conference play, and how is that going to affect their seeding?
Yeah, well, you nailed it. It's certainly defensively. The amount of open looks that Santa Clara was able to generate in a Gonzaga home game on a Saturday night, where the kennel doesn't get crazier than Saturday night games. So the fact that Santa Clara generated so many open looks, obviously they were red hot making 18 threes, but Gonzaga's had that happen in other losses as well. The Oregon State loss, there was some opportunities there, missed free throws, bad mistakes, sloppy turnovers, dominated in the overtime. So those two, having those two as the last two results still taste in the mouth. They had a lot to work on, but I also think schedule wise, this week was a dream for them. They had the Thursday bye, so they had all week to just kind of, all right, let's regroup. I think on a different show earlier this week, I said go to a meditation getaway. Basically have a retreat this week. And then you got your Portland game tonight. Obviously, that should be a cakewalk. Nothing against the Pilots, but I mean the talent gap is what it is. And so this is a perfect opportunity for the Gonzaga to just get back to who they are, really take a look inside themselves. And they were in a troubling spot at this time last year for different reasons. Just didn't have the wins. The team looked lost. I had just saw them lose at Santa Clara last year around the same time. So Mark Few knows what he needs to do. Staff knows what they need to do. It's a lot of the same players. So I think you'll see a lot of adjustments in their next big game, which probably qualifies as that St. Mary's game next Saturday, of course.
They've got
And
Oregon State in between.
oh, they do. Okay, sorry, I wasn't looking at that. So
Yeah,
yeah,
they've got
obviously a
Oregon.
brutal
They, they, they've got
Tuesday.
they have to avenge
Tuesday.
the Oregon State loss still.
They got a nice little favor though to get that game on Tuesday, extra rest and recovery, and come up to Moraga about 4 days later. I think they'll
Yeah.
be okay. Obviously, Oregon State beat them in a crazy road environment, but I think getting right against Portland on the road today should get them ready for Tuesday, and then you got that St. Mary's game. So I do think big picture, I would be surprised if the losses kept mounting. If they do, then yeah, there's a very real chance they're not going to the tournament. The resumes, the two main resume measurements would probably have them out right now, which is crazy to say out loud. The strength of resume is 51, wins above bubble is only 50. Obviously, they've won at San Diego State. They buried Baylor by 38. They beat an Indiana bubble team it wasn't a competitive game. They hammered Arizona State. Well, they didn't hammer them. They beat them late, but they won by 8. And those are all teams either in the field right now or right now. Indiana's like the first team out. So I think when you take a deep dive into the resume, they're fine. But again, you mount some more losses. Right now, they're just 4-6 as just a record against the top two quadrants. That really is kind of shocking. So get some more data in there. They'll probably be able to turn that around pretty quick. But yeah, I really think they probably just worked on defensive drills and communication drills and all those types of things you need to be effective defensively as they head into this next stretch, which as we said will be challenging.
Yeah, I'd imagine that uh, Markview had them very focused this week going into Portland, and yeah, so I do feel sorry for the Pilots tonight going into that game.
Yeah.
Rocco, it's great to always have you on the talks on bracketology to look at where these teams are as of now. Uh, and we'll definitely like catch up down the road. We'll bring you back on, and I'm sure I'm going to eventually see you at one of these games. I feel like we have been ships in the night at when it comes to going to some of these local games in the Bay Area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll probably be at one of these this week. I actually haven't decided, but no doubt. Look forward to it, Zach. Always happy to come on and love all of your energy and passion for the WCC, and you're doing great stuff. So thank you.
Thanks, Rocco. Catch you later.
Thank you.
Oh, Rocco, you can just actually hop off this time. Oh, there you go. All right, cool. All right, so we are off to talk about the rest of what's going to be happening on Saturday, but we'll do a quick little recap of what happened Thursday. So we did have LMU beating Pacific 73-68. LMU back to 500 in conference play at 4-4. Portland beating San Diego 90-82. Max McKinnon with 43 points, which tied a school record. It's also the most points scored by a WCC player this season. Oregon State beating Pepperdine 82-62. 12-1 at home. Mentioned that a little earlier, just how dominant they have been uh, at Gill Coliseum. Michael Ratai 22, Nate Kings with 20. Santa Clara kept it rolling. Mentioned that obviously already. Like they beat Washington State 93-65 in sole possession of second place in the WCC going into tonight. 5 players in double figures. Uh, Johnny O'Neill led that charge with 17, 5 for 7 from 3-point range. Lawan Watts had a triple double for Washington State, 20, 11, and 10. St. Mary's getting the 71-51 win against USF on Thursday, outscoring the Dons 52-12 in the paint. They held Malik Thomas to 8 points, 1 for 12 from the field. Just a dominating performance from the Gales. All right, so I'm gonna look back at that Santa Clara games, that Santa Clara game in this matchup with Oregon State, because this was a physical game the first time around. Santa Clara did win the first go round in that matchup 82-81 in overtime. It was the Tyree Bryant tip in that was the difference in that game. I would largely expect this game to look very similar to what we saw just a few weeks ago. Both teams are 3-1 since that game. Santa Clara is 3-3 on the road. They are 6-5 in quad one, quad two games, which this will qualify as a quad one game. Oregon State dominant at home. The one loss that they have in their building is by 3 to Oregon. So this is a very confident Beavers team that will be having Santa Clara come in and obviously looking for a bit of revenge, a bit of uh, trying to make this even against this Santa Clara team, because that was a game, probably one of the better road performances we've seen Oregon State put together. Because when you look at, say, like what they did against San Francisco last week, that was obviously a bad outing uh, for OSU. But against Santa Clara, that was a game that they could have, should have had, and it slipped away late. It slipped away in overtime, and if not for a tip in, a missed free throw, a any number of little instances that went Santa Clara's way, that bounced Santa Clara's way, Oregon State probably wins that. And we might be having a get different conversation about maybe it's Oregon State instead of Santa Clara that we're talking about in this at large uh, window. But as it stands, where Santa Clara is the one that has the inside track, is starting to has put together the resume with the wins at they've won at start over. They've won at Gonzaga. They won against Washington State. They beat San Francisco. They beat Oregon State. 3 of those have been at home. So Santa Clara does need a prove it game on the road. Going back up to the Pacific Northwest is a great opportunity for that. And I'm looking at a couple of key things here for this game. First off is the battle on the front line. Michael Ratai and Parsafala against Christoph Tilley, Jake Ensminger, and Johnny O'Neill, I feel like that this front front line for both of these squads is really going to kind of be almost like the tipping point one way or the other. Christoph Tilley, over the course of the season, has gotten into foul trouble in some key moments. So I think it's really important for him to stay on the court, much like I talked about him staying on the court against Gonzaga, which that very much made a difference in that game. And for 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 the Beavers, Fala and Ratai getting off to good starts and getting rolling early is going to be critical against this squad. And Ratai is again like because he's been so good in conference play, so good in this season. His ability to go inside outside with say Johnny O'Neill and Jake Ensminger is going to be really critical to kind of keep them away from the paint and give give the likes of give the likes of like their guards and whatnot, Nate Kings, some space to actually get to the lane because that's going to be incredibly important as this game goes deeper and deeper because you can't completely rely upon the three, which Oregon State doesn't really do. Like they do a lot of their work inside the arc. They are one of the better 3 point shooting teams by percentage, but they don't have an over reliance upon that 3 point shot. Even though Kings is one of those few guys who can give them that little bit of cushion out on the perimeter. And then also the health of Tyree Bryan is critical for me. He did leave the game the other night with an apparent leg injury. It is unclear what his status is going into tonight. But Santa Clara at the 3 point line is another one of the factors in this one. Perimeter defense for Oregon State is something that needs to be keyed on. They were Santa Clara was 13 for 32 the other night against Washington State. When Santa Clara makes the most threes in the conference, so keeping them off the 3 point line, making it more difficult to get those shots off, is a really important factor in this contest. So 3 point shooting, the health of Tyree Bryan, and then is this front line battle between Oregon State and Santa Clara wildly important. And for the conference race, this is also another key battle for Oregon State. They're 5-3 right now. Santa Clara 6-2. If with a Beaver win, they do end up back tied at 6-3. So kind of puts Oregon State a little bit back in the momentum of moving further up the standings. But if Santa Clara gets this win, they separate themselves a little bit more from this jumbled pack. They would end up being 7-2. They'd even separate themselves from Gonzaga a little bit more. Santa Clara is 6-2 right now. Gonzaga 5-2. USF 6-3. Oregon State and Washington State both at 5-3. So this is actually a critical day for both Oregon State and Washington State, as if they drop their games today, they'll give them their fourth loss and they'll start to slide them further and further down the standings. So for Oregon State, critical game, and then of course for Washington State, same thing as they will be hosting St. Mary's later this afternoon at 5. And this is a really tricky spot for for Washington State at the moment. The metrics for them, obviously, like their at large hopes are pretty much wiped. Their chances to get to the NCAA tournament really rest upon what they're going to do in Las Vegas in the WCC tournament. It was not a good outing for them the other night against Santa Clara. They ended up losing that game by 28. They the turnovers are still a problem. 17 turnovers for Washington State in that game. Santa Clara had a 28-9 advantage in points off turnovers. Now that's the worst separation for them over the course of the season. So that not necessarily something to really like look at is the points off turnovers, but the turnovers in general are a problem. Points in the paint were a problem against Santa Clara. Santa Clara had a 42-28 advantage there. And Washington State is a turnover machine right now. They are last in the WCC in turnovers per game at 15.3. They're 342nd in all of college basketball in turnovers. And the points off turnovers, they've only had one game in conference play where they scored more in points off turnovers than their opponent. And that was against Portland when they were plus 16 last week. So turnovers is a critical factor in this game for Washington State. And again, like this is also a team. You look at their points in the paint and how they're going to get their points. Washington State does rely a lot more on the perimeter. Lawan Watts, obviously, good perimeter shooter. Ethan Price, good perimeter shooter. Eric Strupp, good perimeter shooter. But St. Mary's does a very good job of making you do things you are not comfortable doing. And you look at USF as kind of a prime example of that. USF is a good 3 point shooting team, maybe an over reliant 3 point shooting team. And St. Mary's held them to 26% from the field just the other night. They dominated them in the paint. They were plus 40 in the paint, which is a wild number. And for some odd reason, they just play USF well. It feels like it doesn't matter how high or low the expectations are against the dot, or how high or low the expectations are of USF. That St. Mary's just dominates that matchup. But this first matchup between the Cougars and the Gales is going to be fascinating. I keep looking at this matchup of who is going to guard Lawan Watts, because if there is a guy I feel like is kind of like the tipping point of what this is going to look like, it's him. And St. Mary's does a very good job of eliminating your best player. If they decide that one guy is going to be our focus and we're not going to let him operate, they don't operate. And we saw that the other day with Malik Thomas. I think that's what St. Mary's is going to try to focus on with Lawan Watts. And the matchup to me is Luke Barrett. Luke Barrett, to me, is the guy who will probably get the majority of the time in that matchup. Gritty defender. He's going to push guys into corners, push them toward the defense. St. Mary's doesn't have a lot of great one-on-one defenders. Mitchell Saxon is probably the exception to that rule. But they play great team defense. They help each other well. They know where to force guys to, and if they can slow him down and they dominate the rebounding, which is kind of what St. Mary's tends to do. They are second in all of college basketball in rebounding margin. They're going to come out of this with a win. I think St. Mary's does look the part. They're playing well right now. They're a 5.5 point favorite going into this one. And Washington State's inability to take care of the basketball is something that St. Mary's takes advantage of. You can't make mistakes against a St. Mary's team because they're not going to make mistakes. They're a league best in turnovers per game at 9.8 per contest. So just it's the things that Washington State does not do well are things that St. Mary's does well. This almost might be just almost lopsided matchup just based off of what we have seen in recent games. And the to me, Washington State feels like a squad that is starting to run out of gas. They feel like a team that played well with all the pieces that they were able to have, but the injuries are catching up with them. The fatigue is starting to catch up with them. The fact that they have essentially only 8 guys in that rotation has finally caught up with them as they are getting deeper into conference play and are facing squads that are frankly deeper than they are. Santa Clara is deeper than they are. Gonzaga is deeper than they are. St. Mary's is a deeper team than Washington State is, and I think we're going to start to see this, maybe not snowball because they're still better than the bottom half of the league, but the deeper teams are going to take advantage of this Washington State team, and we've already seen that a couple of times early on in WCC play. All right, so a couple of brief notes on what the other matchups we have. We're going to talk about Gonzaga, obviously. Gonzaga Portland is the matchup later today. This one is going to be in Spokane. No, this one is at Portland at the Chiles Center. And this matchup, it's really about Gonzaga's defense. Can they play consistent defense? Are we going to see new rotations? Are we going to see maybe a mix up of the lineups? Because clearly the lineups we have seen to this point do not work on the defensive front. And yes, some of their better defensive players that they do have on the roster are minus players on the offensive end. But they might be at the point where you have to sacrifice some of the offense to at least play some better defense. Would we see more of Emmanuel Innocente? in this one because that is maybe your best on-ball defender on the entire team. Are we going to see a bit more of Dusty Stromer because he has also been a good defender? Are we going to see less of some of the other players that we're used to seeing? Are we going to see less of a Graham Ike and Braden Huff because they have not been good defensively? Are we going to see more of Michael Ajayi because he has been one of the better defenders, even though he has been he has been very disappointing on the offensive end from what we thought we would see at the beginning of the season. They've let three straight opponents shoot better than 53% from the field. They've allowed 200 points total in the last two games. Now, I don't expect those two numbers to hold against Portland, but Portland is a team that has won two of its last three games. They're playing a little bit better right now. They had Max McKinnon go for 43 the other night. So they have some individual offensive punch. They have some individuals who could have a big night. And for Gonzaga in this one, it's about finding what is going to work and taking advantage of it on the defensive end because there's no concern about this team's offense. Like they scored 99 in the loss against Santa Clara. That's not the problem. They need to figure out a way to slow teams down, and they have yet to figure that out. They need to figure out what the rotation is, what the pieces look like in and honestly, like I think we need to see it almost right away in this game. I almost don't want them to wait until we're two or three media timeouts into this one. Wait until halftime for it to happen. I almost want to see if we're going to see a different starting lineup from the get-go because I think then you'll start to see maybe what the level of urgency is about this team's defense. And I'm going to take this game with a grain of salt anyway because as much as you want to say like you can't overlook anybody, this is a team in Portland that talent wise will just not be able to match up with Gonzaga anyway. Gonzaga will like 99% is going to win this game. But what can they take to learn and then use that against Oregon State next Tuesday? What are they going to figure out and be able to utilize against St. Mary's next Saturday? Those are the two that we're really going to see what this Gonzaga squad is going to look like kind of moving forward in those two matchups. Not necessarily tonight, but can they get some level of rotational stability before they get to those two games? Couple other games to watch. Pacific at Pepperdine. Also, I'm watching the Mo Odom Lamar Washington matchup. Who controls the pace in that? It's going to be a fun matchup. Like these two have had their moments, obviously, and both of them play in very different styles. So it'll be really fascinating to see how that goes down in Malibu. And in San Diego at San Francisco. San Francisco, can they get back on track? This Don's team has been a very different team since Guido Newberry went down. They have now played 11 games with him and 11 games without him. And there is now a very distinct difference. They have been out rebounded in 8 of the 11 games since his injury. It was only 2 of 11 with him. They have been taking an average of 5 more threes since the injury. Now they've actually been a better 3-point shooting team since then. The percentage has actually gone up a point, even though they're taking more. But opponents' field goal percentage, it was 39% in the first 11 games. It has been 46% since. No team had shot better than 50% against them prior to the injury, and it has happened 4 times in the 11 games since. So some things for the Dons to work on. The San Diego team has also played well in spots. They nearly took down Santa Clara. They nearly beat Washington State. Again, like it's like the almost, but you can't overlook the squad. Tony Duckett, the freshman, has played really well as of late. Santiago Truitt has also played well over the course of conference play. So a couple key matchups there. And for San Francisco, it is finding someone else other than Malik Thomas and Marcus Williams to help carry the load. That front court, as I kind of mentioned, just the defensive shift, the rebounding shift that has happened since that front line, that front court is going to be I think the thing to watch for USF the rest of the way in conference play as we get deeper and deeper and closer to March. All right, Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. I want to thank Rocco Miller one more time for hopping on and talking bracketology and where we are right now with these teams. Santa Clara, obviously, on the rise. St. Mary's has continued to show that they're likely a tournament team once more. Gonzaga trying to figure things out as they have the softer week this week and prep for a big week next week against the Beavers and the Gales. All right, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube and follow along on your favorite streaming services. Follow along on social media at Unofficial WCC Pod and at Post by Zach. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I will catch you later.